Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of DNI Pe Charcha, presented by Novartis, an initiative by India Diversity Forum. I, Melita, would like to take this opportunity on behalf of Team IDF to applaud all the DNI leaders working diligently towards transforming India Inc. to be more diverse and inclusive. While our leaders are earnest with their efforts and initiatives, nevertheless, they continue to meet resistance every step of the way, leading to some initiatives backfiring and some failing to achieve the intended outcome. To be able to reap the full benefits of diversity, inclusion, and equity, India Inc. must devise a strategy to effectively address and manage the underlying cause and the psychology rooting the resistance. Today's Charcha will focus on decoding the psychology behind the resistance to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, to begin our Charcha, I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers participating in this discussion. Anuradha Khosla, Vice President HR at HCL Technologies. Chella Pandian Pichai, Head Talent Learning and Organizational Transformation at Biocon Biologics Limited. Radhika Tomar, HR Director at Kimberly Clark. Sujata Sudhindra, DNI Head at Aditya Birla Capital. Sumedha Pal, Country India HR Director at Honeywell India. And moderating the session is Aparna Pathak, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, Customer and Technology Solutions at Novartis. I'd like to now step aside. Over to you, Aparna.
Thank you, Melita, for this introduction. And I must tell you, this is a great privilege to be in this panel where we have such esteemed speakers. And also a very important topic around the resistance to DNI, because we have been doing this for some time and we don't see the results that we desire. Now, what are the reasons for this particular resistance that we have towards these initiatives that was taken up by the multiple companies? So today we are going to discuss that what are the reasons for some of the challenges that is faced by India Inc. when they're trying to go towards the diversity and inclusion efforts. There have been successes, but there is also a lot of failures. And that's why it is a continuous journey towards equity and inclusion. Research suggests that any kind of resistance often stems from change to the established status quo. And there is an element of fear when there is a change in status quo. So today, in today's panel discussion, we will be talking a bit more about some of the reasons, some of the cases where we have seen success, and how we can overcome these resistance. So with that, I would like to ask Sujata. Sujata, how does a leader identify the first step to managing resistance? How do we identify where to focus? You know, there's a lot of this, we really don't know. We may not always see an overt resistance, but we a lot of covert resistance to DNI. So any thoughts around this?
Thanks, Aparna. I think that's a very interesting question. I wouldn't call that as resistance. First thing, it's an opportunity for us to help them understand. Resistance is when I have no knowledge and I do not know, and I know it's going to impact me, correct? So it's a cultural issue. It's been there from ages. It's a change in mindset that we are trying to have. So it's very important to accept that it's going to take time. For this, we need a lot of patience. You have to be open-minded. You have to be non-judgmental. And when I'm saying it may look very theoretical, but that's how we started. So we started in the first year when we wanted to set up this entire DNI. It's not an initiative. It's a cultural change. It's the DNA of the organization. So initially, the leaders have to come together to say, yes, we are very clear that we want to have this as the part of our culture. So we started having formal, informal conversations. And let's accept, Aparna, business have steep targets and they have been successful achieving those targets, doing it in a certain way. Now, suddenly I say, no, let's bring in about, changes. They are going to say it's going to impact me as an individual, right? So why I don't have time? Because you're always constantly evaluating me on what I'm achieving. And in this, if you have to bring about changes, then what is that I'm going to get out of this? So that was the first thing. So, conversations over a period of time. Secondly, we had to go back and understand you can't go full hog and say, I'm going to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion. No. And diversity does not just mean gender, Aparna. It means diversity of thoughts. It means, as an organization, are we ready to experiment? Then we started going and saying, which are the functions which can, for example, look at first baby step, can we look at gender? For example, collections, I'm in the lending business. For collections, my collection guy said, please don't bring in any women right now. Might be in telecall centers we will bring. Yeah. So which are the pockets where there are low-lying fruits that you can definitely work upon? So it's very important to tell them that it's fine. We will give you bench, 2%, 3%, we will start working. Thirdly, more than anything, today's generation, all the organizations are saying we want to build a customer-centric organization, which means you have to understand the stated and unstated needs of the customer. Unless and until you will not have that talent pool, which will be able to, give to your customer, you can't be a great organization. And when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, let's be very clear, nothing which is going to dilute meritocracy. We said meritocracy is the fulcrum. It is giving them an equal opportunity and a level playing field for them. So that resistance, because we are asking people to unlearn. So I think we should go, step by step, give them comfort, and then you should always find ambassadors who are ready to take up this initiative. We then made them, the spotlights and said how it has actually helped. We did a small study, took a small group. It was not easy, Aparna. It's not as easy the way I'm now saying. 3 years has been very tough. But we started in small pockets, provided enablers, and then gave spotlight to the managers, and they actually said the productivity of the team has increased. And then you will have to replicate. It takes time.
True, it takes time. A very important point that it is a cultural journey and it is not something that will happen immediately. There's no point in setting targets because that again becomes, a tick in the box exercise. Very good point of unlearning some of the things that we have been, talking about, and which we have been, as a woman, I would say that, a lot of the biases that, we ourselves put, that, women can't do this or women can't do that as well. So lot of unlearning, open-mindedness that you said, and you said that, have allies or ambassadors who will help you with this change. Very, very well put, Sujata. So coming to Radhika, and maybe others can also pitch in, what do you think are the key factors which are mainly responsible for the resistance?
Yeah, thanks, Aparna, and thanks for hosting us. You have a tough job today of culling insights from some of the long-winded answers we give you, but thank you for hosting. So I think there are a few things, right? And this goes back to the psychology of resistance. And if you really think, all of us have at some point learned or researched about the way our brain works. So there is millions of years of cognitive programming where our reptilian brain still responds to threat. Back in the day when we were hunting to survive, your brain was adapted in a way where if you see something that looks different from you, that talks different from you, the first response is a threat response. It's a danger response. And I think over the years of evolution, perhaps it has suppressed the seriousness of the response. But the fact is that that response still exists. So when we see someone that isn't quite like us or experience something that is different, we've been taught to look at it with a little bit of suspicion. And so the only thing that can overcome that is actually a conscious reprogramming, a conscious pause, a conscious decision, a choice to say, hold on, let me not let my brain automatically decide for me. I think the other thing, so that's one, our brain is wired in a certain way. We as humans are hardwired like this. The other one is to take a very principle-based approach. And, Sujata spoke about that in people's minds and even in leaders' minds and very evolved leaders' minds, there exists this false choice of either merit or diversity. It's almost like both are jostling for space. And many organizations proudly say that, we only use merit, we will never compromise on merit. And they say that they use merit to promote people as if it is almost solving the issue of diversity. Actually, that is a fallacy in itself. So merit assumes that there has been no bias in the system in the first place, that the best person wins. But if an organization and if our society, which it has been operating in the same construct, in the same environment, where bias has been allowed to, frame our decisions, and there has been discrimination, then how can merit overcome diversity? In fact, merit will just encourage more of the same. So for merit to work effectively, first you need your pool of candidates, your operating norms to be diverse at the outset. And so I think we have to step away from that fallacy that that I have a choice between merit and diversity. Actually, first you set a level playing field for everybody, and then talk about merit, right? I think that's a principle-based shift that we need to make. And I think the other one that holds us back a little bit is sometimes when we approach it from the aspect of a bias training. Yeah, I think, and the moment you say bias, right? If I tell you that you have unconscious bias and you're being biased towards this situation or this person, your immediate response is to say no, right? There's an immediate defense. I think our conversations need to flip on its head. And so any training that says unconscious bias, actually we need to rethink. Why are we not framing it in a way that talks about inclusion, it talks about our behavior, actually talks about what connects us, what makes us like each other rather than what differentiates us. So actually it comes from a place of, let's encourage humility, let's encourage curiosity, let's encourage inclusion and collaboration rather than let's remove bias. So I feel like there is some part of us that is how our brain works, but then there are some man-made traps that we've let ourselves fall into that we now need to step out of.
Thanks, Radhika. I think that's wonderful that you're saying that, when we are talking about the level playing field, everybody doesn't start at the same starting point. There are some people who are actually starting much ahead, and obviously, even if people have merit, they will not even come to the starting line because they have not been able to go there. And I very well put. I think you're putting it in the context of how we have been so used to looking at anything which is not similar to us as a threat. I think that has been wired. I mean, it's thousands of years that it has been wired, and it takes time. It just takes time. So I'm really enjoying this, different perspective that is coming. Anything that you might want to add, Sumedha, to this point?
Yes. Yeah, Aparna, thank you so much. And first of all, I mean, I can't agree to Radhika more. I mean, she really laid it out very, very well. I just wanted to share a couple of other perspectives because what we realized and the fact around unconscious bias, which Radhika was also talking about, it's there, right? But unless and until they start seeing that, right in front of them, that how they are doing it through examples, it is very difficult for them to understand or to really, accept the fact that there is an unconscious bias. So some of the things which I wanted to share as an example, and hence just wanted to add to Radhika, like, for example, we recently conducted this entire awareness around inclusion and diversity. And of course, like most of the organization, the belief is that you drive inclusion and you end up having diversity, right? It's not the reverse way. So we started doing these campaigns around that, say a male colleague in your team puts up a banner and says that, just because I'm a man doesn't mean that I don't have to take care of kids in the evening. Okay. Then there is a bachelor who puts up a board and says that just because I'm a bachelor doesn't mean that I'm available to work late nights. I have my hobbies to pursue, right? Then there's another guy who has maybe a long hair and says that just because I have a particular, passion to keep the way I want to keep my hair doesn't mean that I'm not responsible with my work. Right. So it just breaks and shatters a lot of these beliefs, which which all of us may end up doing very unconsciously, and brings up things which we are doing maybe on a regular basis, which are our unconscious bias. And I think that's something has been a big learning for us in the last few months, that you bring it out in front of the managers, wherein they start identifying that, okay, I mean, this was something which I was not aware of. You're on mute, Aparna.
Sorry. So I think very valid point, Sumedha, that, when we are looking at things that, we always feel that, we are always fine, we are always doing the right thing, but we may not always be doing those things as well. Because, there was this TED talk that I was listening to, which is by Verna Myers, and she was saying, I was just getting into a plane, and I saw the pilot was a woman pilot. And I was saying, oh, great going, etc., etc. And then suddenly, then when we were in the flight, there was turbulence. And then, she's saying that, oh God, I wish it was a man. And she said that, this is something that, kind of unconsciously came in, that, they might be more competent. Now, also giving a bit of a context with other diversities that we have, and we look at various intersections that we might get in, and how each and every intersections can lead to more and more resistance. So it could be people with disability. So for example, we know that if we hire people with disability, we might have to make accommodations, which might have an impact on some of our infrastructure that we have, or the ways that we are doing. So there is also an element where we are saying that this can also lead to saying that it might lead to more work. Right, so that could also be one of the reasons. So anybody would like to pitch in on what are the other key factors which can be responsible for resistance, and your thoughts around this as well?
I think we should start celebrating, Aparna. For example, if somebody is trying that initiative, we always, try to evaluate if the person's succeeding or no. We do not look at the intent and efforts part of it. As an organization, if we start celebrating, I'm sure, everybody will, definitely follow. Secondly, pandemic has taught us now that geography and location is no more a constraint. So especially for PWD, where organizations were, just postponing their decision, saying that we need to build better infrastructure. I think half of that has been answered. Now, all of us or most of us are still working from home, and we are effective. So it only goes to show the intent of the organization. Intent of the organization is the leadership team here, Aparna. Organization is nothing but the senior management. If they decide to come together, it can happen. But for this to be successful, I would strongly say that, diversity and inclusion will be successful only if you have your processes, systems, and enablers supporting, otherwise it will not work. Because apart from sensitizing your managers, apart from the so-called culture, you should have systems and processes which is going to support. And celebrate.
Exactly. I think we don't celebrate enough of the successes, and we focus on what did not work. So Anuradha, so putting a different connotation to resistance, right? So where we have resistance, we are also forced to relook at the solutions that we have provided. So, and we might come back to a solution which is in fact even better than what was initially proposed, because you had made certain assumptions. However, having too much of resistance also can be very wearing. Then after some time you say that, okay, I mean, maybe we will not do it now, maybe we will do it later when the people are ready or the processes are in place. So how do we balance this, having resistance, which is good, because that is what the diversity of thinking is, because that will also give rise to different, better ideas. But at the same time, having too much of resistance means that, really you can't move forward. So what are your thoughts around this?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Aparna, for hosting and moderating this session. Very important topic, because diversity and inclusion and resistance to diversity and inclusion is not uncommon. We do find that, there, the other panelists also have shared multiple strategies how to constructively combat, resistance, small things, whether it is celebrations as just shared earlier. Resistance, isn't uncommon, and in my opinion, is good. It's a pragmatic strategy, that we have also used to include or recruit a couple of whom I would call, reluctant cynics from the group of resistors, whom these could be line of business heads, these could be functional heads, these could be individual contributors, but they're resisting to this change process. It's important to include them in your core group, because they keep you honest in your efforts, because they're bringing forward a very divergent perspective to each thought that you're putting together, or initiative that you are putting together. Despite the efforts that you take in saying that I need to build a culture of equity, inclusion, we do put in our sensibilities, keeping in mind the diverse ecosystem. As you said, it's not just about women. We're looking at the LGBTQ community, persons with special abilities, cultural diversity. As a DNI team, we are also keeping in mind not only just the sensitivities, but also, embedded legal ramifications. We're keeping all that also in mind. And there are conversations which take place not only just at a diversity and inclusion team level, but across levels of leadership, with a good intent, with an intent to have more and more inclusive conversation. However, resistance is bound to crop up. Despite all the efforts, there will be resistance, from various quarters. There'll be reasons which people will put forth, which we need to address with, I would say, great patience. And make honest efforts to respond to their queries. We might not have answers to each one of them. A patient conversation, being open to different views, perspective. I have seen that will push your initiative, the organization's initiative, in a positive direction. However, you might reach a stage which I have also experienced many a times in various initiatives that we have launched, a stage of resistance fatigue, where so you've got to be cognizant of that. We might become a victim of that, and it can negatively impact the overall agenda and the drive that you have of the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. It can just put things off track. So the question is, when do you assume an authoritative stance to address resistance, right? When do we need to channelize our effort in the right direction? What are the signals that we need to keep in mind? I would say that when when it's becoming detrimental to our strategy to create an equitable workforce, because we are talking about an equal opportunity employer, when it's becoming detrimental to that underlying vision that we have, then that positive resistance is actually taking the shape of a damaging one. So what I mean by that is that, we want to create a workplace where each one can bring their whole selves to work. You have feeling of trust, teamwork, collaboration, which is the very foundation of the innovative spirit in any organization. But if resistance is impeding these very, very fundamental values, it must be addressed, and for all the right reasons. Because if it's impeding collaboration, means that people are not able to, not open to working with a different set of diverse ideas, or they're not willing to work on collective intelligence to come forth with the innovative solution. If it is impeding creativity, then again, people are not able to bring their unique perspectives and experience to work. So basically, the resistance should not negatively impact the very fabric of our organization, the values and mission of the organization. And one last thing that I'd like to share is that there are legal ramifications of all this, right? And there is an impact on the overall brand value that you're creating for your organization. So do keep that in mind and then take a balanced stance.
Thanks, Anuradha. That was really fantastic because, you know, it's very difficult to say till when can we look at the resistance, because you would like to hear everybody. You want to hear everybody because that's where we have the diversity of thinking. But ultimately, if the thinking is not channelized or it is impacting the brand vision, it is impacting your ability to attract talent. Then it becomes an issue, because you know, a lot of research with saying that, you know, the new workforce which is going to come in are looking for employers who are you know, inclusive, who are diverse, who have this you know, mindset as well. So very interesting. Anybody else would like to pitch in over here? And you know, Anuradha had brought up a lot of good points around this.
I mean, I do want to add a very simplistic view, okay? And it's sometimes we forget the simple things, which is, I don't know if you all have heard of this equation called the change equation. It was created by somebody called David Gleicher in 1960s. And it basically says that in order to have effective change, the formula goes like D into V into F greater than R. Okay, so basically saying dissatisfaction with the current situation into a vision for the future, into first concrete steps is greater than resistance. So when you have somebody who's a senior stakeholder, who's one of the decision makers in the organization, who is resistant, I mean, there is a proven way to approach it, right? Think about, in his world, what is causing him dissatisfaction. Think about what is the vision that you're proposing that will help him alleviate that, him or her alleviate dissatisfaction, and actually sit down and agree on at least the first concrete step that you're going to take together. And then you get the ball rolling and build momentum and start to overcome resistance. I just wanted to lay that out as something that maybe you can go back, research, everyone can go back, research, think about, and use for practical action.
Thanks, Radhika. I think that's a very valid point, because, you know, and many of the changes actually fail because you do not have the systems and structures to support it, right? So this is something that, that is, I mean, if you look at any kind of a process change that we are doing, you know, this is something that we have seen wherever we have had a bit of different ways of thinking. If we have negated that, you know, you can be really assured that the change will not go through, right? So Sumedha, coming to you, what are the ways that we can build an equitable organization so that everybody can contribute to this journey, and not there's a word called othering, right? So that, you know, you should not feel that, you know, that we are building up this equitable organization so that and others are feeling left out. So your thoughts around this?
No, absolutely, Aparna. And that's a very, very valid question, because, you know, most of the time, like Sujata made that point very early on in the discussion, it's a culture we are building, right? So while there is a vision and we are, of course, putting our strategies for that vision, but ultimately it's actually a culture, what we are talking about. And that needs a lot of these real-time examples which each employee can feel and relate to, so that they feel that it's an equal opportunity employer, right? And an organization where diversity of thoughts are encouraged, inclusion is prevailed. And we always go by the saying, it's a very common saying, I'm sure all of you would have heard that, is diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being invited to the dance, right? So that's what we try to do. Some of the things which we are doing, and I'm sure you know, other organizations are also in a similar lines, I would maybe cull out 3-4 areas, Aparna. The first thing is absolutely making leaders accountable, right? While there has to be a sponsor, it cannot be an HR agenda. It cannot be something which HR drives, HR tracks, okay, how many diverse employees you have, what kind of diversity you have in the team. It has to be something wherein it has a strong sponsor as a business leader, and plus it should kind of percolate down to other leaders in the organization. Something which we struggle with is that it stays with the top 2 layers of the organization. It never percolates down to a manager level. And that's where I think most of the organization, struggles, because that's where rubber meets the road, right? Wherein you actually, each of the leader feels that if I have a diverse and an inclusive team, I can do wonders with my results, right? And I can have a very different perspective to the overall business performance. So that's something which is very, very important in order to maybe as a first step to build an equitable culture. The other thing which we have started doing very consciously is on inclusion councils and resource groups, right? We do, of course, have, diversity councils and things like that, which is again a mix of leaders and people from all strata of employment or our employees representing as part of that council. But apart from that, I think resource groups or employee networks has been working wonders, right? So it's not only for women, it could be for LGBTQ, it could be for all abilities, it could be for veterans. There are multiple such groups like that. And I've seen that creates a very different excitement and engagement with employees, because they feel that, okay, the organization is recognizing that, there is a group like this, and hence there is a resource or a network group which I can maybe a part of and avail, right? So that really sets the stage, if I can say, with respect to being an equitable employer. The other thing is about our own policies, right? So whatever, say, we come up with from a policy standpoint or guideline standpoint, it is very important that the words which we use there, right? So gender neutral, of course, I mean, goes without saying, but at times we forget about the other aspect of diversity. And that also needs to come when we say, talk about a job description or talk about our policies in the organization, because it is very telling. And like, for example, recently we did change our insurance policy, and we'd say that it's applicable to your partners as well, because those are very small things, right? But it goes a long way to say that, okay, the organization really creates a very, inclusive culture altogether. And it's in a way, while there could be a company strategy, Aparna, but actually the proof of pudding comes in the daily interactions, right? How my manager is interacting with me, that tells me the story of what Honeywell is, right? So hence it is very important that these kind of messages goes to the last level, and we are able to talk through that. And last but not the least, of course, having a parity in all our talent actions. So be it if you are having promotions, if you are hiring, if there are merit increases, ensuring that all aspects of diversity are kept in mind, and we are not maybe favoring unconsciously one particular diverse group. So yeah, so those are, I think, the few things which are very critical.
Very practical points. I think one of them, the biggest, is that leaders need to be accountable. The HR and the D&I professionals are just enablers, and we have to understand that we are enablers. It needs to be owned by the business, because we are not managing the teams. It's the business which is managing the team. They're managing the diverse team, and they need to walk the culture journey. Also, that it needs to percolate down. Even if the leadership is accountable, it needs to percolate down to the multiple levels of leadership that you have. And then you talked about networks, the ERGs and the resource groups and the councils, which actually gives everybody a say. So you are able to touch all the organization levels. And then very nicely mentioned that the language is very important. The language that you use is very important. So when we are talking about these small changes, and we actually think that, oh, it's a small change, what's there? I can just write, your spouse or something like that. But as soon as you say partner, where for example, for the LGBTQI community, where they still illegally they can't have a spouse, it makes a lot of difference. A lot of this feeling of being part of the whole group. So thank you, fantastic points, Sumedha. So Chela, we have not talked to you a lot so far, but we would like to hear some practical examples, success stories, and how to manage resistance effectively. How have you done it? Have you seen some examples within your organization or heard something from outside? Happy to listen here.
Thank you, Aparna, for hosting, and thank you for including me. Great to be with the great thoughts which is coming from the panelist. And so the resistance, I think we've talked about, I think I heard carefully, was listening and learning from all of you. We have touched upon almost every aspect of resistance. So there is one aspect which I could add to what everyone has said, is to find the actual problem is very important for every organization, because there is no tailor-made solution for resistance on DE&I, which every organization can copy paste. The reason being, there is no standard principles, there is no standard methodology, because it purely depends on the three factors for each organization that is very unique to them, very unique to the business they are in, and very unique to the organization itself. So I think fundamentally it's important to identify what is the resistance and where is it coming from. So talking about solutions and what worked and what could work for people. Design thinking is one amazing tool which could enable every organization to identify what is that unique resistance they have. Because I won't even call the resistance which people have is also unique to their own organization. May be common in nature, but the solutions may not be common in nature, or the intensity may not be common in nature, right? So to get to what actually is resisting, it's important to understand where it is coming from and who's the cause for that. It could be environment, or is it culture, or is it the leadership, or is it the middle managers, the people managers who are not embracing the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or is it from top that there is no belief in the top that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important for the organization. I think to find that how design thinking would help us, it should not be driven by HR. I completely agree, Sumedha, that it is not HR agenda, and it cannot be driven by a group of people who are core team and then want to drive this. It should come from a diverse group of leaders. So what we did is to get the business leaders to come for a design thinking workshop. It took about 3 to 4 months for us to get to where we want to reinvent. When I'm saying this, it's not new to us. It's not a first time we are starting a D&I practice. It's been an integral part of who we are and what we want to be. And this has been there, like Anuradha said, very nicely woven into our fabric of culture, right? It comes from our founder and chairperson. We're fortunate to have this coming from top, but from different organizations, the different challenges or resistance they would have, right? And then the design thinking gives you an outcome of what is the actual problem, whom are we solving for, and what is that we want to do. And when you get all of this together, I think the ownership increases. So that could enable the organization to de-resist, if I may use the word, de-resist, and then move forward, right? So that is one tool which I found it very much used by few organizations or several organizations, and it's been working well, and it's working for us. Second is when we talk about women, I agree. I think Sujata started off saying diversity is not gender. Fully agree, and all of you reflected on diversity being PWD, or it could be LGBTQ, or it goes beyond that in terms of culture, thought process, and everything, right? And somewhere there is a stereotyping in women mentoring women or men mentoring women. Why don't we shift that and women mentor men, right? And that's something which I've seen working in many places where women mentors for men being a part of this women network. And we always look at women network, and we do have women network. But as a part of women network, as the EBRG group, there has been always a mentoring, right? The mentoring is always women being mentored. Why do we see that only mentees can develop themselves by being a mentee? Mentor can develop by mentoring, right? So why don't we shift it and put the men being mentored by women? There's another opportunity to look at, right? So we do have that approach as well in our plans. Men allies are very important, right? So men for women. So the resistance, if it is coming from one gender, I'm not saying it is, but if an organization finds it is coming from one gender, right? Or if one gender is resisting, saying these are the roles which cannot be done by another gender, I think one of the way to solve that resistance or de-resist is by getting more and more men involved. If it is coming from men, I'm saying, or if it is coming from leaders, more and more leaders involved. If it is coming from top, I think it's important for the middle organization to kind of bring that awareness to at the top level, saying how important it is for organization from culture perspective or from environment perspective, even from HR, and in terms of attracting and retaining, it becomes very important and significantly important in the current scenario. So I think somewhere the resistant spots have to be enabled to de-resist. And what we do in terms of enabling leaders to not to be in the space of resistance, I think you all touched upon the DNI sensitization workshop, primarily focused on eliminating unconscious bias, right? I know Radhika spoke about this, and Smita, you touched upon the unconscious bias. But the fundamental problem in unconscious bias, I'm a certified coach for unconscious bias, but the fundamental problem is first agreeing to that I could be in that space of unconscious bias. And I'm not agreeing to it because I'm not aware that I could be there. So the blind spot, right? Many times it is unintentional. I'll tell you, I've seen many leaders who were seem to be perceived to be resisting, but when they understood, they put conscious effort to come out of it. And that's a big learning for me when working with different countries and different leaders in terms of DE&I. I realized that it's not all the time conscious as we perceive. Sometimes it is they're unaware. And they take little time to understand. That is not resistance. It is a process of de-resisting, right? Or the process of understanding. In that process stage, there are some conclusion made by people or organization, oh, there is a resistance. And I think we need to allow that process, but we need to accelerate. I agree. You can't just allow the process for years to happen. I think in India, from gender diversity, we see it's all happening for years. But I think somewhere we need to accelerate, but we need to allow the process as well. And that can happen through awareness. I think that's where, as our organization, we have started taking all the senior leadership through unconscious bias program and made it mandatory that every leader goes through this, and periodically. That's our plan for future, right? And lastly, of course, you spoke about EBRG groups. We spoke about women network, and the different types of EBRGs could have. One other area to focus as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is to have a next generation network. And we have started looking into that direction. Let's not forget, as we talk, Gen Z is joined, right? All these days we're talking about millennials and Gen X and baby boomers. And let's not forget that from last year, quietly when pandemic is happening, there is one bunch of people have come in subtly, and they are seeing a different world. And today morning, I was talking in one of the forum, and I was mentioning, let's not conclude or perceive them going to be difficult, and loyalty and all this perceptions were there. I said, none of us know. Nobody knows about Gen Z, right? We can take the learning from home and bring it to organization because we have our kids at home, nowhere else. No one has managed them. And if anyone is concluding that, Gen Z is going to be like this, no, let's not be quick to tag them. And tagging does not come in gender. Even generation gaps, we just tag people and give them a stereotype that millennials are like this and zillennials also will be like that. So I think somewhere a next generation network is important. So as an organization, we have kind of started some basic work on that to get this next generation network coming together and ask them, what do you want and how do you want the culture to be? Can they influence our culture? Can they influence our organization? So that is where something which we're looking at. And lastly, one other important point in the solution space for this, there is something called diversity, equity, inclusion, dilution. It subtly happens. Leaders are in kind of aligned to what the organization wants to do. And say, assume that the organization has a number in terms of gender diversity or in the entire aspect of inclusiveness. But there is something called attrition, which many organizations are not able to avoid, right? Or no organization is able to avoid. The percentage can be different. It differs to industry. But as the trained people go out, or the people who are aware of diversity and equity, or practiced people go out, new set of people come in. By the time you realize that we need to gear them up with this, the dilution starts. Because every manager has a role to play. Dilution needs to be looked into. So in nutshell, so these are all some of the thoughts I thought will be relevant to today's conversation. And most of it we do, either we are already doing or we are put in our strategy plan, and we are very serious and committed. And finally, to close it, so we have a number which we have committed, which is by 2030, we want to be equal company, which also means 50-50 in terms of diversity ratio. But I want to close it with what Anuradha said, what Sumedha said, Sujata, and Radhika also said. Diversity is just not gender. It's the whole gamut of what we want to do. Hence, we're calling it as, this is what we want to be. It's our identification as an organization.
Thanks, Taylor. Really great, interesting points, because, this is where, again, the diversity of thinking that we never thought of design thinking, being used to kind of come up with solutions. So very, very well talked about this, the design thinking, obviously male allies, we talked about a bit there. In Novartis, we are doing reverse mentoring for LGBTQI, because, that's a space that not many people are very familiar. So there is, and we are doing it for the CEO the direct report of the CEO that. So we are starting with them, reverse mentoring by, someone from the community. But totally agree that, why can't, and we can look at intersection, we can look at millennials or Gen Z, being a mentor to a Gen X manager or leader. And then mindfulness, I think this is where, even if you do the training, training is by itself is not, impactful unless you see, practice mindfulness. I'm conscious of the time, and I see there are few questions. So let me take the first one is, can change in initiatives in any organizations trigger stress in employees, further adding to the resistance? So, if we are doing certain initiative and then we change it suddenly, can it also lead to resistance? Anybody would like to take this particular question?
I think I'll take that up, Aparna. Yes, there will be stress, and let's not be defensive about it. And I'll give you examples for patients and risk. During month ends, there's a lot of work to do, and it'll go till midnight. So our men were asking, Sujata, you're saying women, but tell me, we sit up till 12:30, 1 o'clock. They can't sit. And even if they sit, we have to ensure that they will go home safely. So this was the resistance, So we did not say yes, no. We just said, okay, can we just go through our entire process? And we asked them to take them through the process. We said, see, we don't understand business. Help us understand business. That's how we approached them. Take us. Then we started asking them, where are the leaks that is happening, that it's spreading, from instead of 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it's going up till 1 o'clock. They themselves came up with solutions. There will be stress. Then they will say, okay, you are saying that you want more women, but, gali galoj nahi de sakte, and we are okay with that. because there's so much of pressure on us. We say something to a menfolk and we're fine. We go for a drink and that's all done. But we have to be super careful. Then we said, okay, let's translate back the same thing at home. How would you manage to do it? Would you do this? And one thing, Aparna, probably not related to this question, while we'll do everything to bring in women sensitized organization, we went back to all employees and said, you know, you all will have your family members, your spouses, you know, your families and friends, probably women who have left their job because of family. Today, they want to come back to the workforce and they need a little confidence. So we are there to provide you, you know, there are second opportunity organizations. We will put you along to the consultants. You all can have a chat with them. And that became a big hit because all the, you know, few of the men whose spouses did leave the job for the kids, they were all there and saying, yeah, we need some guidance, we need help. And, you know, so once you bring in, take them to the organization initiatives, they own it up. Go away, Aparna. But I think step by step, we can definitely
I think that's a fantastic point, which is you make it personal. You know, you just put it as if it's your home. How would you feel, right? So this is something that that really works. And I think other piece which is there is the storytelling, right? You know, when you talk about some of the stories that have happened and how it has happened and so on and so forth, right? So when you see this is something that is in your house, it could be your sister, your you know, daughter, your spouse, or your mother as well. You know, this is something that you know you start appreciating. The other question that I have over here is: should an organization celebrate lack of resistance, or should they be worried? And I think this is a very good question. Radhika, would you like to take this?
Yeah, sure. I think you should feel worried, right? The moment you don't have resistance means you don't have a diversity of thought. Yeah, it means that you also don't have psychological safety, because people, I mean, it's empirically impossible to have a divergent point of view. It's just that people aren't feeling enough to express that divergent point of view. So a lack of resistance, you should definitely be worried. And actually, let me, why do we talk about organizations? Let's pull back a little bit. Let's talk about humans. Yeah, let's talk about us as people, as parents, as spouses. And Chela said that we are learning Gen Z on the go as parents, right? By 2030, 30% of our workforce is going to be Gen Z. Yeah. And by the way, we are also raising Generation Alpha, which is the generation after Gen Z. Have we thought about what are we doing proactively to build divergent ways of thinking for our children? And I'll give you a simple example. All of us, live in big cities. Many of us live in condos or gated communities. Our children go to a select set of schools. So if I ask around this room, we'll probably come up with a list of maximum 20, 30 schools that all our children go to in each city. So where are we exposing them to any diversity while they're growing up, right? And if there's one thing that India can offer you, it is diversity. I mean, there's no other country that can offer you that much diversity of thinking, of perspective, of economic strata, of background, of religion, you name it. Are we proactively choosing to counter this bubbled, blinkered existence for our kids? And there are ways you can do it. I mean, I'm not saying, don't send your children to good schools. Of course you do. But at the same time, are you building in an activity where they are going and playing in the neighborhood park outside of your condo? Are you taking out an hour in the evening to take them, to a basketball class where you have a whole variety of kids coming, not just people from your school or from your condo? Are you taking them to a music lesson, which is, which is different from the music style that they are used to, where they get to see other people and their musical tastes? I'm saying there are ways as a parent to proactively induce diversity or introduce diversity into the way our children operate. And if we don't do that, we're going to have the next generation of knowledge workers and people who are going to have, are basically going to be clones of each other. So I feel as individuals, there's a responsibility for us.
Yeah, I think Radhika, that's a very valid point, because if you have to look at diversity, you have to look at how diverse is your network. You know, is it the similar talk? You're talking to similar kind of people, and that's why you don't. You know, we call them the echo chambers, right? We are listening there, and we feel that everything is fine in the world because everybody is agreeing and everybody is aligned. So Anuradha, I know we have just 5 minutes, but if you would like to answer this question, which is, do you think having a sensitization session at introductory onboarding of employees will help reduce resistance to DI, or we have to go beyond that one particular training?
Sure. Sensitization workshops are important at every level, be it induction, onboarding. We also talked about sensitization workshops top down too. So whether it is at the CEO, CEO -1, CEO -2, at every level, these sensitization sessions are important. What is critical is that, you know, in these sensitization workshops, we talk about behaviors, you know, which should have been exhibited and weren't exhibited, or, you know, were exhibited because of which the individuals or the teams at large felt included. So talking about, you know, do more, do less is important, and not just the theory of the business case of a diversity, you know, and inclusion. What should you do more? What should you do less? And at every level, top down. We've done these kind of workshops and we have seen the impact of it, where we have captured, you know, through pulse surveys, engagement surveys. We have asked, you know, employees who had gone through structured sensitization workshops and asked them questions pertaining to inclusion. And similarly with another sample group who hadn't gone through sensitization workshops, and there was a clear difference, you know, which was, it was very, very evident that the employees who had gone through a structured workshop felt that, yes, they felt included in the meeting, they felt part of it, they felt part of the decision-making process, they felt they were bringing their whole selves to work. So this was not just theory, but they were, you know, experiencing it day in and day out in every meeting, in every conversation, as compared to the other, you know, lines of business who hadn't gone through it. So of course, very important, very critical, and you will, you know, surely see the returns with a structured approach like this.
Thanks, Anu. We are just 3 minutes from our time. Anybody would like to have a last word before I wrap up the session?
I just had one point to add to what Anuradha said, right? For both the questions which you asked, Aparna, let's assume that we are somehow did everything right and got the organization to have 100% of acceptance and zero resistance. But can we say that we achieved our milestone? The answer is no, because there are two reasons. One, we will be constantly hiring a new generation coming in, or maybe experienced people with different generations. So multi-generations keeps coming. And there will be a leak in talent, that we will also lose people. So hence, there is no stage where an organization can be complicit and say that we have done and we are there. It's a constant evolution of the D&I. And the needs also will change, right? What we focused on 10 years back is not the same. Today, we are expanding the horizons of D&I, and we're going into multiple facets of D&I space. And maybe 10 years later, it'll all be with the digital and technology coming in, there may be many different ways of doing it, right? So I think that's my last point to say, that we cannot be complacent. We can be proud of what we are today, but there has to be a continued commitment to get to where we want to get to.
Thanks, Chela. And it was wonderful talking to you. I feel that, you know, the conversations should continue, but we know we have restrictions of time. So a huge thank you to Anuradha for your point of view, Sumedha, Radhika, Sujata, and Chela. I think it was really interesting. Learned a lot. I mean, I had not thought of design thinking, but we all agreed that it is a journey. Yeah, it is a culture journey, and it will not end saying that, you know, we have achieved, but it is a continuous process. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate. And audience, we were not able to answer all your questions, but feel free to write to us and see how we can help you on your journey as well. Thank you all. And thank you, IDF, for this opportunity for this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow, that was an absolutely insightful session. I'm sure IDF members, as well as other DNI leaders who joined us today, will have multiple takeaways from this charcha. I would like to thank our speakers for their great insights and thought-provoking discussion. I would also like to thank our audience for keeping the session interactive and spending time out of their busy schedules to be here with us. Let me take a moment to share a reminder for the upcoming IDF workshop next week. Renowned psychiatrist Dr. Harish Shetty will conduct a workshop on gender equality, unconscious bias, and impact on mental health on 25th November from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. This virtual workshop will be open for all IDF members and their teams as well. Do reach out to us if you need any further information. And we'll be back with more DNA experts deliberating on the various aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the next edition of DNI Pe Charcha, presented by Novartis next month. Until then, thank you and have a great evening.